Once again, welcome to Connect Groups. So let's just dive right in. Let's start with the behind-the-scenes question. One of the ones I frequently get is people just want to know a little bit more about our leadership structure. And so how that works is that we are a lead pastor-led church, which means that for me, as a lead pastor, I'm the primary vision caster. I'm the one who seeks God and really discovers what he wants for our church as a whole. But that's a process. That's not something that is just a solely Matthew Johnson event. That is something that I do through discussion with our pastors, with our elders, through much prayer, through discussion with other pastors, just figuring out what the needs are of our church for that season. But then I take it and I bounce it off of the pastors, and then I finally submit it to the elders. If we're talking about large vision things, and they give their approval to it or even ask questions about it. So we're primarily the lead pastor-led, but we are an elder-governed church, which means we have an elder board made up of 7 elders. And these are wonderful men of God. They are close personal friends of mine. I'm in communication with the elders frequently. I would even say weekly on many cases, whether we're texting each other or emailing each other or having conversations. We're very, very close as a group. But the elders are the overall authority in our church, which means they govern the things of theology or our bylaws, all things concerning our overall budget. So they set the budget for the year, and they decide all the major decisions. So when we look at making decisions that are going to change the very culture of our church or the future of our church, that is an elder decision. So they will release a budget for a certain position if we're going to hire someone, but then they don't actually make the hiring. So they're, again, overall, and then they submit it or release it to me, and then I take it to the staff. So once the elders have approved something in an overall sense, the pastors are very much the leaders then on the day-to-day basis. And the reason that's the case is it's just simply practical. The pastors are empowered to make decisions in their ministry. And so each of the pastors have staff that report to them. They have volunteers that report to them. And so they are the primary vision casters for their individual ministries under the overall vision of the lead pastor. And so then it works with the staff that supports them, and then it goes down to the volunteers. And we have a very, very, very healthy governing body of our church. Like I said before, the elders are super close. We trust each other. There's accountability there. There's encouragement there. And the same is true of the pastors. We are close personal friends. We hang out every day. We laugh together. We meet together. We eat together. And the same is for all of our staff. So if you're just curious about what happens behind the scenes, just know it is very, very healthy. And that is one of the reasons why God is blessing our church. All right, so let's dive in and look at this past week. What I taught on for the weekend services is this idea that Jesus, he sent his disciples out and he asked them to do something that is not the norm. So when someone is getting sent out to go on a trip, the natural thing that all of us do when going on a trip is we prepare. So we get the necessary food, the necessary clothing, the necessary finances, so that we can go and enjoy ourselves and be prepared and not find ourselves in an emergency situation. And Jesus told his disciples to do the opposite. He told them, don't bring extra clothes, don't bring extra food, don't bring extra money, don't worry about any of that, just go out. And that is an unnatural, even somewhat on the surface, illogical thing to ask. But the reason that Jesus was doing it was he was preparing his disciples for something greater in the future. He wanted them to experience for a short season what it's like without him physically being with them, so that he could prepare them supernaturally to trust in God, so that God could supernaturally provide for them, because Jesus knew ultimately he was physically going to leave, and they would once again have to depend on God to supernaturally provide for them in all areas, something that the Holy Spirit would do faithfully with the disciples. And this is really the rhythm that Jesus takes all of our lives on. And I understand this principle because I've lived it out many times for me when I was coaching sports. I love sports. I love to coach sports. And when I was in Michigan, I was coaching a varsity basketball team. And when I first started coaching them, there was some drills I wanted them to do so that they could learn other skills. And I played college basketball, and when I played in college basketball, there was this drill that we could do, and I'm not going to tell you all the details, except it required constant running and passing without dribbling, and then 2 guys simultaneously. I mean, it was all together, it was 11 guys, just in constant motion, making layups and just going full court. And we had 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, we could go over 130 times. We could make over 130 baskets in that time. So the very first time I did this with the varsity, this first year of coaching varsity, I told them, I said, guys, you're going to be able to get over 100. And the very first time they did this drill, they got 60. And they just looked at me like, you're totally crazy. There's no way we ever get 100. And I said, you can. It just requires no mistakes. It requires every single person to go at their absolute fastest pace, passing the ball, catching the ball, focusing the entire time, making every single layup, and you can do it. And so we did this drill every single practice, sometimes multiple times for 5 minutes of running. And I remember first time it was like 60, and then the next week it was like 65 we got up to, and then it was 70, and then I think we made a pretty good leap, and we got in the 80s. But I remember the first week that we finally were getting close, and I remember the moment as everyone was passing the ball, and it was getting closer and closer, and we had it on the scoreboard, so our assistants were putting, every time we made a layup, it was going higher and higher, and I remember it was like 95, 96, 97, 98, and it hit 100, and everyone just cheered, and we kept going, and we got above that. Well, by the end of the season, we were able to get, as a varsity team, in the 120s. And what they realized was that what I was having them do in these drills of practicing, passing, and running, it all had a purpose. It was teaching them to run at top speed and passing and concentrating and making layups at top speed because it was a skill you needed in a game situation. So this challenge that I gave them to work on that at first seemed impossible had a purpose that later on they would get better because we would be a very fast-paced team. Now, this is the same principle that Jesus is teaching all of us. He has an end goal of what he wants us to do, but he's giving us practical steps of faith that get larger and larger so that we will learn to trust him. And the skills that we learn here, it's so that later on when he brings another bigger step to us, we are willing to take it because we've learned to trust him, that he is always faithful. And here's a dynamic that I highlighted over the weekend service, is if you don't take the next step of faith in front of you, then the next step that Jesus would have you take would be too big for you. So if this first step in front of you, you think, I just can't do it, I can't do it, then you will never take a bigger step because once you remove that step, that gap is just too far and too intimidating, and many Christians stop in their process of development, and what they unfortunately get is they don't experience the true life that Jesus is calling them to. And I think about David, King David. Before he was king and he was just a boy and he took on the giant, I mean, it was seemingly an illogical move. This little boy taking on just a trained killer and a giant of a man. But what David said was, he goes, the reason I'm confident I can do this is before, when I was defending the sheep, I killed a bear and I killed a lion. I believe clearly the Spirit of God came upon him in those moments so that could happen. But he knew in his mind that the Spirit of God, when he came upon him, allowed him to do supernatural things. And so what he was saying was, my past experience with the Spirit of God gives me confidence that I can do this next challenge in front of me. So the question for all of us is, what is it right now that Jesus is setting in front of us, this step of faith that we need to take because of what he might call us to do in the future? So as you discuss this as a group, talk about what he's calling you to do right now. This is a very familiar question we oftentimes ask, but what is he calling you to do right now? Encourage each other, set some accountability, and next week when you come together, bring that back up. Ask each other how you've done in that area, because it might be something like witnessing to someone, it might be trusting God in another area, it might be forgiving someone, it might be to finally step out and consistently financially give, it might be serving, whatever it might be. Talk about it, encourage each other, and who knows what God has in the store for you in the future, because we know with Jesus, the best is always yet to come. Love you guys, so proud of you. Have a great group.